Still need to beef up and get ready for when the next human being purposely infects himself or herself to come into the United States with the intention of either infecting humans or infecting our food source.
Anthrax is the most likely agent to be used in a biologic attack. It only takes a small amount to infect a large number of people. It's inexpensively grown from just a few spores and can be easily engineered to be drug resistant, which means it's more difficult to treat with antibiotics. Now, anthrax can also infect humans by breathing in spores that have been engineered as a weapon. In 2001, anthrax spores were mailed to news reporters and U.S. senators. These attacks involved letters which held only 1 gram of powdered spores, about the amount in a sugar packet, and still 22 people were infected and 5 people died. In comparison, an attack that used 2 kilograms of anthrax, about the size of a 5-pound bag of sugar, could infect 100,000 people or more. Scientists have developed models of what an anthrax attack might look like. Anthrax sprayed from a plane or truck onto a city is a likely scenario. People may not see, smell, or even hear the anthrax being released. This type of attack would lead to inhalation anthrax, the most severe form of the disease, which starts with fever and other flu-like symptoms. Symptoms usually appear about 1 to 42 days after inhaling these spores. Now, unfortunately, once there are symptoms, it may be too late to treat with antibiotics.
4 أرطال من الأنثراكس، 4 أرطال، جنطة هالكبرها، يشيلها واحد فدائي ويدخلها من أنفاق مكسيكو إلى الولايات المتحدة، كفيلة بقتل 330 ألف أمريكي في ساعة واحدة. يعني 11 سبتمبر تطلع زلاطة عند الموضوع هذا، صح ولا لا؟ وما في داعي طيارات وشكبانات ومواعيد وقصة من المؤامرات والتوقيتات. واحد عنده من البسالة اللي يدخل معاه 4 أرطال من الأنثراكس ويدخل حديقة البيت الأبيض، صح ولا لا؟ ويكت عليهم النون هذا، صح ولا لا؟ ويبب عقبها، تصير المسألة طماشة هناك.
After killing thousands of Iraqis and Syrians and beheading 2 Americans, could ISIS be planning something bigger? According to Foreign Policy magazine, which accessed the laptop and first reported on it, the computer has documents on how to carry out a mass attack. Among those documents, how to make biological weapons, even how to weaponize the bubonic plague. If they got the agent, got the dispersal method right, can it wipe out whole city blocks?
It can wipe out entire cities.
According to Foreign Policy, one of the documents on biological weapons says, quote, use small grenades with the virus and throw them in closed areas like metros. The laptop was the property of a jihadist labeled Mohammed S., who joined ISIS after studying at 2 universities in Tunisia.
They confirmed that the guy studied their physics and chemistry.
What is interesting about this case is this guy had a science background. I mean, he wasn't just any old schmo looking into this.
But there's another world of concern that we addressed in the panel, and that's the world of bioterrorism. It is one of the lesser discussed aspects of the terrorist threat. But after a year of inquiry, not just in Washington, D.C., but around the United States, we concluded that the threat is real, it's growing, and frankly, given the nature of the threat, we don't think that the country is sufficiently prepared for it.
The Russians continue, they violate every treaty that they've ever signed. They have developed 3 main biological weapons, which they stockpile to this day in large numbers. The first one is anthrax, the most deadly one. Anthrax is a bacteria. It exists in nature. It's found in the soil, particularly in cold climates. It's preserved by the cold. There's 2 forms of anthrax that you could suffer from. Pulmonary anthrax, also known as wool sorter's disease. If you breathe anthrax spores and they reach the lung, you have like a 90-something% chance of dying. It's like a super pneumonia. Basically, your immune system reacts so strong to this virulent bacteria that it fills up your lungs with fluid and you suffocate. The other is gastric intestinal anthrax, which is from eating it. George Washington, the president of our country, had that briefly, almost died, I think, when he was first president. It's from eating meat that's beef that's, gotten anthrax from the soil and has not been cooked sufficiently. With pulmonary anthrax, it's like 98% fatal. I mean, antibiotics aren't going to usually save you even. This is so virulent a disease. We know that North Korean soldiers defecting across the DMZ, when they test their blood, they find antibodies.
Experts have long suspected that North Korea harbors the smallpox virus, which spreads person to person and kills a third of its victims. Other analysts say satellite images and internet inspections of the regime suggest Pyongyang is interested in advances in biotechnology and germ warfare. The report says that germ production is small-scale and far less expensive than building nuclear arms, and that living weapons are difficult to detect, trace, and contain. North Korea's secretive nature makes it hard to assess the regime's biological weapons program.
The importance to understanding the smallpox threat is that this smallpox is not even like the normal smallpox. Smallpox is a disease that was eradicated, I think, in the 1960s. I think there hasn't been a case of smallpox since then. This weaponized smallpox is of such a virulent kind that if you, for example, were inoculated against regular smallpox, that inoculation is not going to protect you from the weaponized smallpox. Weaponized smallpox blisters the inside of the intestines. Again, you breathe per minute, I think it's something like 6 gallons of air. If that air is mixed with this virulent strain, you will very likely, you have a 1/3 chance, if they do it right, to contracting the disease. It's not as fatal as anthrax, but it's very deadly.
Jeff, what is the end game for Communist China?
Well, it's very interesting. The Chinese General Chi Hao-chien was the defense minister in 2005. He made a number of very interesting speeches. He was the head of the Chinese Military Commission. He was one of the top strategists in China. He gave a speech, a secret speech, was on a sort of a secret Chinese server that got out. The Epoch Times published a translation of the speech in English shortly after the speech was made. The speech was about China's future plans for America. It was given to an elite set of party cadres, that's elite Communist Party members in China. And it was really a very brilliant speech. And he talked about Hitler. And he talked about Hitler's concept of Lebensraum. And he talked about how this was really a very valid concept for China, because China had so many billion, what is it now? It's 1.4 billion, I believe, people, and they are crammed into a space, really a living space, with arable land less than that of the United States. And he said, so how do we solve this problem? I mean, we can't really even openly talk about Lebensraum. We can't actually really talk about this because Hitler gave it a bad name. And then he goes into this business of how the Nazis were kind of stupid and they didn't really know how to do this kind of thing right. But the Chinese Communist Party can prove itself to the Chinese people by showing the Chinese people how to go out and to move in an outward direction. What he meant by that was that China has to find new land for all of these people, excess people they have. He talked about how the Chinese environment was degrading because China was so overpopulated. They had such terrible pollution problems in China. You may not know this, but the leading cause of death in China is from the air pollution. It's killing people right and left. And so he speaks to this. He also he started talking about China's long-term economic problem. He said, look, China cannot afford a recession, because he said, if the Chinese economy should fail, the people of China will hang the Communist Party in the streets. And he said, so we must solve these problems. And he said, so how do we solve the problem? Where do we find the land for our people to go out? India? No, there's already people there. Siberia? No, it's too cold. Australia? No, it's too much of a desert. Where do we go? Besides, if we take any of that land, the Americans will be on us, defending the Indians or defending the Russians or defending the Australians. So he said the only solution is to go after the Americans. So the Americans, they were our friends. They helped us against the Japanese in World War II. It's tragic, but it's them or us. If we don't take their land and exterminate them, we won't be able to move half our population there, and we will collapse, and the Chinese people will destroy the party, and they will hang us all. This is the substance of his speech. So then he talks about how they can destroy America, and he talks about biological weapons and nuclear war. And it's very interesting because, you know, you mentioned Colonel Lunev. I had this private conversation with him that really lined up with Chi Hao-chen's speech. Of course, Colonel Lunev was a sinologist. He was an expert in China. He spoke fluent Mandarin. He worked in communist China for the GRU for a period of years. And what he told me was at the last meeting of the GRU he attended before his defection, they said, all right, Soviet Union's collapsed, our military has suffered some setbacks, but the war against the United States is still on the drawing boards. We're not going to invade the United States as we had planned in our previous war plan. We're going to only invade Alaska and parts of Canada. China is our ally. China will invade the lower 48 states. We're giving them the lower 48 states. And other countries, third world countries, will be invited in for looting rights. Now what's so very interesting is that this speech by Chi Hao-chen, the secret speech that got into the hands of the Epoch Times, dovetails exactly with this information that Lunev gave me about this division of North America between China and Russia. And I should provide you with the text of the speech. I do have it at some point in the future, but it's a fascinating document.
What's the end game for Russia?
Well, of course, Russia wants to dominate Europe and the Middle East, and they have their sights set on Alaska and a good portion of Canada. Of course, they have their colonies in Africa they share with the Chinese. Their end game, of course, is, like the Chinese, they want some kind of crisis in the future. They want to create an economic chaos here, political chaos. They'd like to cause a civil war in the United States. They'd like to fill Europe with Muslims because then they can be the ones to come into Europe and rescue Europe from the Muslims. Because what the Russians really want is they want to own Europe. You have this Eurasian idea that Alexander Dugin has been promoting. This idea was promoted. One of the things we have to understand is that when the Nazis collapsed in World War II, the communists had infiltrated the Nazi Party during the war, and that leading Nazis had been turned to agents of the Soviet intelligence services, so that when Hitler committed suicide, they were in charge of the Nazi diaspora into places like Spain and South America. And they got their hands on that wealth. That's how they got into the Arab world. The Nazi Arab contacts became the communist contacts. The communists also had infiltrated the Arab world in the 1920s. So they used this, they piggybacked, but they adopted this notion of the Nazis, Eurasianism, which was the idea that there is this one area that is Eurasia. You know, Gorbachev used the term Europe from Brest to Vladivostok, and Yeltsin referred to this as well. And this is appeal saying that there should be a new empire with Moscow as the capital, and Boris Yeltsin even suggested it extend across Alaska and Canada. You know, and this was going to be, it's like the Chinese were going to control these races and the Russians were going to control the white race, and that this was a stepping stone, of course, in some Marxist theory to, well, we can't make everybody, you know, the whole world one nation right away. We have to divide it between the races and then step by step make the world into one universal country. So this seems to be their plan, to divide the world with China and to create this Eurasian superpower. And they have ideologists in Europe who are working with them. They're trying to recruit among the European racist right, the neo-Nazi right, and also the European far left. And you'll find these ideologists in France and Germany and other countries.